I am Deborati. I am a member of Sidebar. Very excited to host this session. And I have the pleasure of introducing Yue to you. Yue is on a mission to partner with women and minority leaders to help them break through to the C-suite. And she has coached hundreds of these aspiring executives for almost a decade now, even while holding very demanding product roles. She now works full time as a coach in one on one settings through her Leadership Accelerator program. Yu is also an author. She wrote The Uncommon Executive and Helping People Break Through to C-Suite as a Minority. She kept her former self in mind when she was writing this book and narrating the unique challenges she faced as she was coming up through the ranks, right? Prior to coaching, Yui has spent 15 plus years as a product exec in the Silicon Valley. She was a chief product and technology officer at Fuzzy Pet Health. She was a PM manager at Meta and Instagram, and she was the first PM at Thumbtack. Wow. In addition to product, Yui has also been a VC-backed founder, a venture partner, and a consultant at McKinsey. She also holds an MBA from Harvard and an engineering degree from the UC Berkeley. So, how fantastic is that? Yui, take it away. All yours.
Thank you. Thank you. It's always a little bit embarrassing to hear your own introductions. And you're right, it's been almost a decade. I have not thought about it in that terms because I just have the date 2016 in my mind. So I love it. I love it when someone else gives you a different perspective. So super happy to be here. As you probably seen, I spent a lot of time on the operating side, holding leadership positions, and have now transitioned full time into coaching. And so I really wanted to share this with this group, what I love talking about most, which is how to be a great coach and having that as a part of being a great leader. When I was working in Silicon Valley and in tech, I had many leaders and managers who are also great coaches, and they showed me the way in terms of inspiring just what a different type of leadership can look like. And so with this hour that I have, I want to hopefully provide you all with a few new questions that maybe become your go-to questions, as well as some just thoughts and ideas around how to incorporate coaching more into your everyday practice with your teams, with your peers, and make that a part of just your regular journey. So, I guess to start, what is coaching and how is that different from mentorship and sponsorship and a management relationship? And at the end of the day, I think coaching is really about helping people grow. But where it's different from, let's say, being a teacher is there's active trial and error. So when you think about teaching, or when I think about teaching, it feels more one-sided, right? I am giving a talk, giving a speech on something. I'm trying to convey a concept, and you are sitting, mostly sitting and listening and learning the material. Coaching is a very active process. There's a lot of back and forth and give and take, and there's a lot of mistakes along the way. So, whereas with learning and with a teaching process, there's a bit less of expectation of you're going to try it and you may fail, sort of the error piece. Whereas with coaching, you're actually encouraging the people that you're coaching to stretch beyond their comfort zone, to get into things that they may not and probably not know how to do really well, and to make mistakes and to figure out how to overcome those mistakes together. So it's a much more active process. And as a result, the Socratic method is often used as the default for coaching. Unlike teaching, it's not sort of me giving you answers or advice giving. It's a lot more about asking questions to guide in a certain direction, asking questions based on your own experiences on what might be things that they're missing, but really having them, again, actively come up with what it is that they think they may want to do next. There's a few reasons why coaching can be not as effective as we like it to be. So why does coaching fail? And these are sort of three very common themes that I see. The first is too much theory, not enough personalization. What I mean by that is lots of frameworks, lots of like theory around what you could do, lots of sort of just talking about, you know, what might work rather than in general, rather than making it specific to the specific person that you're addressing. And so, as an example, talking about, okay, in my past experience, let's say at Thumbtack, we ran product reviews this way, or at Meta, we would, get alignment on roadmap this way. But it's very, very generic and not specific to this person who has a specific set of values, set of traits, or the environment that they're in, which again may look very different from Thumbtack or Meta or whatever it is that I'm bringing up. And so when it is very overly focused on theory, it is in theory helpful, but in practice, it's really hard to implement. Or when they go and implement it directly, it fails. And so it doesn't have the effectiveness that you need. Which goes to sort of the second most common reason why coaching fails is it's just difficult to incorporate, right? How many of us have gone to workshops, even courses, even taking week-long trainings, and we're like, this is great. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna like incorporate this. I totally agree. Like this is where the direction I need to learn or the direction I need to grow. And then, a month later, 2 months later, you're back to doing things the way you were doing things. It's just there's such a strong gravitational pull of how your life is set up, how your teams are set up, how your company is set up, that it's very, very easy to default back into, well, I did things this way, and so I'm going to keep doing things this way, even if I know I want to change something. This is why habits are so hard to break. And so with coaching, there is an element of accountability and sort of ongoing touch points, which makes it easier, quote unquote, to incorporate. But also, it has to have that specificity of how is it exactly going to work in your particular situation. Going back to personalization, what are the triggers? What are the specific moments where you're going to incorporate this new thing that you're going to try? Because absent sort of the specific trigger, the specific moment, the super busy real life is going to take over and you'll go back to doing the things the way they are. This is not unlike all other types of coaching, like sports, like you're trying to have an exercise routine, you're trying to have healthier eating habits, you're trying to learn a new whatever instrument. It's a very similar concept. You have to be able to figure out how to incorporate those new habits or those new learnings. Otherwise, it becomes just a default back to status quo. The last one, which I think a lot of us are familiar with, especially as you get more senior in at a company, is just giving advice rather than asking questions, right? How many of us can kind of have gone to someone, a mentor or a manager or a peer, and been like, "Hey, I have this problem," and as soon as you say the problem, they start kind of giving you lots and lots and lots of advice, right? Can be very helpful at times, but often it doesn't get to the heart of the question. And sometimes the person asking the question doesn't even know the heart of the question yet. They kind of need some digging to figure out what it is that I'm really asking. And so without that process, the advice is very surface level. It often misses the point. And it becomes, again, another reason why coaching tends to fail. So I'm going to share with this group my 5 go-to questions. There's some good ones in the chat too, as well, and different versions of it. I'll share them, and I'll talk about sort of why they're go-to and what specific thing I'm trying to elicit based on those questions. So, I think similar to some of the ones that's been popped into the chat, the start of the conversation. What's on your mind right now? What's on your mind right now? So the right now piece of this puts it into the present. If I didn't have that, so if I just asked what's on your mind, it allows people to wander a bit more. A bit more about, hey, maybe I go back a couple of days, maybe I think in the future a couple of days. There's a bunch of things that's on my mind. But what is on your mind right now brings the person to the present. And the benefit of that is, let's say you're the manager talking to, one of your teammates, or let's say you are, someone talking to your engineering peer, you bring your specific relationship context into that question, right? I'm not asking you just generally as a friend, what's on your mind, what are you thinking about? I am asking you as your product partner. I am asking you as your manager. I am asking as your whatever it is, that relationship starts to matter. And so when the other person is answering the question, consciously or subconsciously, that gets considered as a part of, well, what should I say? And what should I bring up? And it really helps focus on, okay, in the context of this moment, this relationship, your particular, priorities of the day, what is on your mind? And so it also prompts people to share what's most important to them. Even though it's an open question, you're not saying like what's one thing on your mind, it's implied. Most people know by the phrasing of this question that I can't really go to 10 different things. And so they're going to start with and really think about what is the one or two things that I want to bring up. So it offers also a natural sort of prioritization function of what's the most important thing, what is really top of mind for you right now. So play with this question. The nuance of the language does matter a little bit. And depending on what you want to emphasize, you can kind of have a slight variations of this. But the idea is to get the other person to start talking about what is the most important thing to them that they think you can help with. And have them actively bring up that topic. That way you're not guessing, you're not starting with assumptions, you're not asking a guiding question like, hey, how is this project going? Or hey, how is, your relationship with so and so, or your conversation with so and so. If you open with those types of questions, it ends up being leading, right? You're going to go in a certain direction versus just a very neutral, anything is possible, but I only want you to give me the most important thing, what's on your mind right now. I'll say one last thing about this question, which is it lowers the barrier a little bit, because imagine if you ask a question like, what's the most important problem you have right now? Imagine like if I say something, you're like, well, how is that important? There's a judgmental factor to, you could like answer that question incorrectly, right? It's kind of scary. Versus what's on my mind? Well, I didn't say it was the most important thing necessarily. I didn't say it was the highest priority thing necessarily. By not stating that explicitly, you're giving the person a little more freedom to just, talk about something that maybe they find important. But if you actually ask them, like, what's the most important thing for you right now? They would answer something a little different because, well, they want it to be you to also perceive that thing as important. And so, it really kind of opens up the conversation to what is important to the other person, what's a priority to the other person, rather than it focusing back on what your interpretation or of that particular topic may be. So what's on your mind right now? This is my second favorite question. And what else? Some people hate this question when it gets asked too often. I have heard it get asked in coaching contexts and other contexts too often. So don't overuse it. Like if you're on your third and fourth and what else, maybe consider asking a different question. But this is a really, really good way to bring additional options on the table, to stay out of advice giving mode, and also to buy you time to think. So these are three really important things used in different contexts. So let's say you ask them what's on their mind right now, but you're not really getting sort of the full context, asking, and what else, right? Or there's a situation where it's like, well, is there something else? Is there something else here that's not necessarily this surface level thing that we're talking about right now? And what else? Or let's say you're talking about options for something, a decision that needs to be made, a particular trade-off that needs to be made, and you feel like you're not covering the universe of possibilities, or you're looking for something more. And what else? And what else? Interviewers sometimes use this question, right? Or it's like, do you have ideas for XYZ? It's like, what and what else? And then what else? You're like, I don't have any more ideas. I'm done. But it's a good way to bring more possibilities, bring more options, bring more context into the conversation. Again, without having to guide, because our natural default is going to be a little bit more guiding oriented, right? If I say like, hey, I'm having trouble with my engineering partner, or we're having a disagreement. You might be tempted to say like, oh, is the disagreement like this or like that? Have you thought about, this person has a tendency to do X? Is that what happened? Right? You start getting into assumptions mode. You start getting into like, hey, did this happen? Did that happen? Have you thought about this? Which become very leading questions. The and what else question allows you to stay, again, neutral and objective and have them bring up whatever else they can think of, right? And it also forces them to be like, is there something else? Is there something else? I maybe didn't think there was anything else, but since you asked me that question, maybe I do need to think harder about, was there something that I haven't thought about? Was there something that I should have maybe picked up on? As the asker, you're not even potentially suggesting there is, but just that process of asking the question can also push the other person to think more about, is there something more, and actually draw out aspects that they didn't think of before coming into the question. Last but not least, it also buys you time if you're kind of thinking about, how would I deal with this? How could I solve this? Bringing more context is always helpful. And so this is a great way to just draw out, you don't know what you don't know. You both have unknown unknowns, and it's just kind of like, is there something else I need to consider? And what else is there? Oh, by the way, if you guys have questions about these questions or thoughts, feel free to drop them in the chat. We will do Q&A at the end. And so if I see them pop up and it feels relevant, I'll try to address it real time. Otherwise, happy to answer them at the end, but feel free to drop them in the chat. All right, question number 3. What is important here for you? I didn't see this one come up, I think. So this is a prioritization question. Often when you ask what's on your mind and what else and what else, what else, right? You start getting a lot of information. You start getting a lot of content. And then many of us are like, let's start giving advice. Let's start giving ideas. Let me help you structure this. Let me help you get to a solution. Let me help try XYZ, right? But really to kind of hone in on like, what is the problem that you're really trying to solve? What is the thing that is really bothering them? If it's not super clear, which sometimes it's not because they're maybe going in lots of different directions, this is my go-to question for prioritization and focus, which is, what is important here for you? It forces the other person to pause and be like, okay, I just talked about 5 different things. Like, what am I trying to say here? What am I really trying to say? Right? And really pick one thing to say, okay, let's start here. The other thing that this tends to do is that if the answers that you've been getting are very general, like abstractions, it can sometimes draw out like what is actually that problem one layer down that they didn't really want to say, that they didn't really want to start with. Just to give an example, let's say your product launch is delayed. And you're talking about all these different types of issues of, this happened with marketing, that happened with support, this engineering issue came up, and so these things were delayed. There's lots and lots of things happening, but they're very general. And you want to get down to like, what is really the thing that you're trying to get at? So asking what is important here for you forces them to pick a thing. Okay, the engineering challenge, let's say, and it forces them to get specific, right? What is that engineering challenge? Like, what exactly happened? But this question again You're not asking what exactly happened. You're not asking, hey, can you just pick one thing? When you ask those types of questions, it feels a bit more, feel a bit more critical, and it can feel a bit more, I'm going to pick a direction for you, rather than having them say what is important. So it's a great way to focus the conversation on one specific thing. You know, if your openers have been too open, to really hone down into what is the first topic that we really need to dive into? What is the most important thing for us to dive into? And I really, really love the for you because, again, there's so much of this that's about the nuance of making the other person comfortable and making it subjective. Because imagine if I just asked, what is important here? Again, goes back to the same problem as that first question when you take out the what's on your mind right now, is there's a judgment in there now. What is important here is an objective question, right? And so therefore there's a wrong answer, or there's a chance for me and the other person to disagree on what is the important thing. When you ask what is important here for you, gives them that safety, gives them that comfort of like, okay, well, this was important for me. Not, regardless of for the company, for the engineering team, for you, whatever it is, like this is what's important for me right now. And that's what we want to talk about. It puts that person first and that person's priorities first. So don't lose the for you. What is important here for you? All right. Fourth question, how can I help? I think a few of you guys had that as your starting question, I think opening question. I actually like to not open with this one and rather open with the what's on your mind, because I don't want to be too helpful up front. But at some point, it is helpful to ask, how can I help? Rather than giving advice on what you can do for them. And so at some point in the conversation, maybe towards like the solutioning of what should happen next, what are the next steps, it is also, again, a time where many leaders will jump into, okay, let's go do this, do this. You do this, I do this, let's game plan. And you sort of start giving the answers rather than having them come up with what needs to happen next. And so this question is actually in disguise a way for them to articulate the next steps rather than you. So you're not exactly asking them, what do you think the next steps are? Because that can sound a little bit more like teaching or a little more pedantic. Rather, you're saying, how can I help? So for them to answer, how can you help? They have to come up with what the next steps are and then figure out how you fit into the picture, right? And so again, you're encouraging the other person to do the initiation, to do the thinking, to come up with the answers, rather than giving them potential answers of how you could help or what the potential next steps are. The other reason I like this question sort of later on when it gets to the what are the next set of actions phase of the conversation is that it allows them to say, it allows them to give you a role rather than for you to give yourself a role. Because often, especially when there's a asymmetry in power and authority, if you say, let's say as their manager, I want to do this, they're not going to say, no, I don't want you to do it. That becomes a difficult conversation. When you say, how can I help? You allow the other person to come up with, here's the role I want you to play in this. And here's the things that I want to try to do myself. And it may or may not be very different from what you would have preferred in terms of where you would have liked to help or where you maybe thought you could be helpful. Maybe very different from the role that you're actually given as a response to this question. And so again, it gives them the ability to proactively put you into a role and to ask for the help that they need, rather than sort of you guiding and giving advice and giving yourself sort of what you think should be, the solution or the next steps. Again, puts the empowerment back on the person that you're coaching. with a team member that you're coaching. All right, last one. What are you saying no to? I like this one in today's corporate environment because there are so many things happening and everyone's plates are very, very full. And I think that there's not enough time spent asking, what are you saying no to? And so, this whole conversation just happened about what's top of mind, what's what's the most important thing, what are the next steps you're going to go do. Now you have like 5 more things that needs to be done, probably. The to-do list just got longer. It's important to force the person to think about the other side, which is bringing it to reality. If we go back to one of the reasons that coaching fails, it's because, well, I have a list of to-dos that make up 60 hours a week already. I can't add another 10 hours on top, right? So it's just not going to happen. So you've got to say no to something. So what are you saying no to? And really forcing them to contrast this with the other side. And sort of anchoring it in, I'm saying yes to this set of things that we just talked about, and this is how you're going to help me. I'm saying no to this other set of things because I'm at capacity. I only have so much time, right? The other way of thinking about this from a mindset perspective is also really helpful. So rather than from like a to-do list perspective, the other way this question becomes really helpful is, let's say you're trying to help somebody speak up more in meetings. And you just kind of talked about like, hey, what are the ways you can speak up more in meetings? You can still ask this question, right? What are you saying no to? They're saying no to staying quiet. They're saying no to going through a whole meeting without saying anything. So having them answer that question in the opposite forces them to acknowledge, okay, in this specific situation, I can't keep doing this, right? I can't just sit through the whole meeting anymore and not say anything because I want to grow. So I'm saying yes to speaking up more. So what are you saying no to? You're saying no to staying quiet. It sounds a little bit silly, but it is really, really helpful from a mindset perspective to call out like, this is the status quo that I no longer want, and to explicitly talk about that. Again, it works both from like a what's the next steps perspective and actively removing things from their plate and giving them the power to do the prioritization. It also works really well from a mindset perspective where it's, I want this new type of mindset. I'm walking away from this old one. What is that old one that I'm walking away from? So what are you saying no to? All right. So those are the 5 questions. Incorporating it. So we talked earlier about how coaching is very difficult, uh, especially as leaders. And so how can we incorporate these questions more into our day-to-day lives and into the work that we're doing? I have a very, very simple framework, which is, what's the trigger? So what's the situation? Identify a situation in which you can practice one of these questions or some of these questions. And then saying, instead of X, which is what you do today, I will do Y. So instead of X, I will do Y. So instead of asking, how is this project? I will ask, what is on your mind right now? Very simple, but writing it out and I sort of explicitly say, instead of this question, I'm gonna ask this other question. So I just have some simple examples here. So trigger, when I walk into a one-on-one with a team member, okay, when I walk into a meeting with a team member, instead of letting them start with status updates, I will ask, what's on your mind right now, right? Whatever your current status quo is, that's the instead of, and then how are you gonna change it? Okay, I'm going to proactively ask, what's on your mind right now? You can switch the question. Another example, so this is maybe during a group meeting or a conversation. Like when I get asked a question about what we should do next about a project that I've already delegated, instead of giving them an answer directly or suggesting potential options, I'm going to ask, what's important here for you? So coming up with what are those little scenarios where you're like, okay, Another example may be after I ask, what's on your mind right now? Instead of just sort of taking it at face value and just going with the first thing they said, I will ask, and what else? At least once. I will ask, and what else once. And if I don't get anything new, great, but let's see what happens, right? Maybe I will get something new that I wasn't expecting. So creating the trigger instead of an I will allow you to get really, really specific about certain scenarios where you can incorporate these and what's the new sort of behavior. So you can even like keep them somewhere with you in a notepad or on a set of notes, so that you remember, okay, every one-on-one, instead of status updates, I'm going to ask what's on your mind right now, right? And maybe you'll forget and they're 5 minutes into the status update, you're like, wait, I wanted to ask a different question. Great status update. What's on your mind right now? It's okay. Give yourself a little leeway. But it's good to think about, okay, what is that specific moment that I want to change behavior in advance, rather than, by the time you've walked into the one on, you're like, what was that question that you said we should ask? Like, how was it phrased? Like, where do I find it? So I'm thinking about those scenarios in advance, coming up with them. I encourage everyone to try for 3. Come up with 3 triggers. Instead of this, I will do this. And just have them in front of you as you go through your week. At some point, they'll feel very natural. At some point, if you don't ask what's on your mind right now, your person you're having a one-on-one with will be like, what's happening today? Yue did not ask me this question, right? So that's, when it becomes a new habit. Rather than, okay, I still have to remember this thing. But for now, as you're learning how to bring these questions into your everyday life, they're not going to magically appear. They're not going to you're not going to magically randomly be like, oh yeah, you thought I should ask this question. Okay, let me ask it now. It's not going to happen. You're going to have to figuring out what's the trigger and what you're going to do when you're going to ask this question in advance. It's going to drastically increase the likelihood that you'll actually ask one of these questions in the next 2 weeks, if you don't already. And actually, I'll say one more thing, which is for those of you who have how can I help as your go-to, I would actually encourage you to try it at a later point in the conversation. So one thing to maybe try there is not opening with it. If you open with it today, maybe you don't, but if you do open with it today, try putting it later in the conversation and starting with a different question. So that could be your like one thing to try, which is like, instead of starting with a question, I'm going to save it towards the end, and see if it makes a difference, and open with something else instead. All righty. We're going to go into Q&A.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Yui. I think we have one question from Amira. Amira, you want to unmute yourself and ask it?
Yes, just 1 second. I'll switch on the camera too. Yeah, so this was great. So I just wanted to know, like, when do you switch, like, from coaching to mentoring to telling, and even I'll take it further to giving up is like, hey, this is not working out. So curious, when do you switch your hats?
Yeah. Depends on how long you've known the person. So let me just describe it a few different ways. So one is just how effective you feel like you're being in the relationship and the conversation, whether it's one conversation or ongoing. I always start with more of the coaching questions, right? To see what comes out, what comes of it. If I truly feel like it's just winding, it's not going anywhere, I'm not getting what I need to really be helpful, then I switch. I switch to like, okay, is it this? Is it that? Is it this? Is it that? Right? It's a little more prescriptive, but it's still, they get to pick from a menu of options rather than having up to come up with the menu of options. If that doesn't work, then I tend to switch into, okay, given what I know about you and your environment and what's happening, this may be a very common thing. Like it gets more prescriptive basically as I'm not getting the feedback that I want from the other person. Oh, there you are. So in general, I very much let the other person guide, but sometimes that guidance is I don't really know, right? And I'm not able to sort of have this type of conversation. And I guess when it comes to giving up, I don't like to give up on most people. I think that I feel like worst case is you're very prescriptive. You're like, hey, try this thing. Like, try this thing. Just go do this. Go do this and tell me what happens, right? If at some point maybe it becomes a performance conversation in a whole other context, but I think the most sort of prescriptive way is sort of where I generally stop. And actually, when I consistently hit that point, especially in my own coaching practice, I'll keep asking them, like, hey, this is not what's going to drive long term change. Let's try to go back up that, degree of prescriptiveness and go back up towards coaching. And I almost always try to go back to, hey, okay, how can I complete this loop from the coaching side rather than the here's a thing to go try.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
Okay, I think
Thanks
we
for
have more hands up. Thanks, Yue. Let's go to Alan.
I definitely was trying a version of the what's on your mind right now to start my one-on-ones, and I had most of the team trained where that was a pretty productive opening. I had one team member who was pretty much always just very casual with that. It was very hard to get them to actually get into work topics. It tended to be something else and less structured. Do you have any suggestions for how to kind of get that moving a little bit differently?
what's top of mind for you at work right now?
Yeah, even
Just
that it tended to be well, I'm busy working on getting my backlog ready or something fairly
mm,
generic. And and I think that at the end of the day, a lot of times would be, yeah, nothing too, there's nothing that feels like it needs a lot of attention right now. I think things are kind of on autopilot. I'm like,
like that's a good thing. Then maybe that
yeah,
is the
it
issue to
wasn't always a
address.
good thing.
Well, so it's interesting because in not bringing a problem, it's almost like that is the problem,
Yeah,
right? The problem is in the fact that they're so on autopilot that it doesn't feel like there are any issues, right?
right.
And so I would actually, in this scenario, I tend to get a little more direct, right? And usually I try to tie it back to, okay, why is it, or I think back to why is it that things should not be on autopilot? Okay, is autopilot going to get you to hit the goals? Is autopilot going to hit you, like get your career trajectory or your career growth goals that you want? Like, why is it that autopilot is bad? Because maybe there is a world where autopilot is good and you don't even need to have the one-on-one and you guys should just go your different ways, right? But I think the reason you're bringing up this question is that that is concerning for some reason, right? And so I would actually then talk about that reason with them, which is, hey, sounds good that everything is going great. How are we progressing towards our goals? Like I would get a little bit more like, hey, here's the issue that I'm seeing. And maybe in a few more conversations, when they feel that discomfort of like, okay, I can't just do things the way they are, they'll start bringing up the like what's on your mind, like what's top of mind for you now is like gonna draw out more because they
Yep,
have to feel that discomfort first.
makes sense. I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it also resonates a lot with me. In some of my earlier conversations with one of my managers, she started using this topic, like this question a lot. So first few times I did not know how to respond, like what's top of mind for you. But after a couple of times, I knew that that's the direction she wants to go into, and then it definitely became more natural. So yeah, totally hear that. Yimin, I see your hand up. Go
Oh,
for it.
I was actually just trying to jump into Alan's question too, because
Mhm.
I've had the same question that I usually ask in my one-on-ones, and I noticed that a couple people tend not to know how to respond or doesn't have any sizable. And I think of three profiles. There's the sort of new grad, young, people in their earlier career who may not know what this is for, or they don't know how to take control initiative of the conversation. So sometimes you just need to probe them with a bit more concrete example and questions about the work. But there are people. I had a new parent, right? He is just so overwhelmed with personal life that work is not top of mind. And if I ask him what's on your mind, it's always personal life, the newborn that comes to mind. I embrace that conversation. I understand they're in a phase of their life where life takes priority. As long as he's performing okay, I respect that. And then there's the profile of people who are sort of in that autopilot mode, who are not really pushing themselves really hard, who are not really performing as well as the others. And this is where I start to push them on, what would you like to, where would you want to go in your career, right? What are some skills you want to develop this year? What are some challenging projects would you like to take on? Or I would like you to challenge yourself in this regard, this direction or that direction, which interests you more. So I start to push them around, like, what challenges do you want to take on, to kind of help hint that they should push themselves harder. So that's my experience. Just want to share.
Yeah, I do think, we're talking about how to incorporate coaching as a tool in your toolkit. It doesn't mean it's always the tool to be used, right? There are many other sort of ways to have conversations and to help guide the growth of anyone really in the organization, but specifically of your team. And so I think of coaching as like one of the tools, but I think going back to some of our earlier conversations, depending on how well they're performing, depending on how early career they may be, you may want to get more specific and more guided because you really want to get to a specific outcome. And it's usually about driving more towards an outcome versus the coaching conversations tend to be much more open-ended, and it's about really you helping them. And you're a little more agnostic to, like, this is a specific outcome that I'm looking for, whether it's because they're earlier in their career or that they're not performing as well, and you're trying to like coach towards that.
Okay. I think we have an interesting comment from somebody. I don't have your full name. Do you want to unmute yourself and talk about that, about the documentation piece?
The me that you're talking about, I'm Jenny.
Hi, Jenny.
Hi.
Here. Yes, please go for it.
Yeah, I'm someone who has struggled with that in the past. If someone kind of out of the blue, even if you're expecting it near one-on-one, asks me how things are going, my mind kind of freezes. And I'm like, in this on the spot, I need to think of something. I don't know what to think of. Everything's fine. So that will be my answer. Everything's fine. Everything's going great. So what has helped me with that is having a place to write that down in between. So as I get frustrated with things, as they come up during my work week, I can write it in that OneNote and then know that we're going to talk about that when the one-on-one comes up. Then I get asked that question, I have this document. Oh, well, this was frustrating this week, or this is something I ran into that worked really well this week. I just have those notes to look at, and that helps me to not be put on the spot or feel put on the spot.
Jenny, I'm curious, do you do this, like, do you keep this document just for yourself, or do you actually share it ahead of time?
It's a shared OneNote document, so we can both see it at any time. So if there's something for me that comes up during the week that I want to talk to that person about, I will also put it in there. It helps me to not forget. There's something I wanted to mention to you, good or bad, especially with the good things. I feel like those disappear quicker and don't need to be addressed. So it's just a reminder, oh yeah, he did this nice thing that last week.
Yeah.
Yeah, we share.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I like
I
that.
just quick comment on that. Like I felt I have tried this with some of my managers and reports too. Sometimes there's an art to it because nobody should feel like, hey, everything that we are doing is kind of getting documented and undermines trust in the relationship.
Right.
So if there are any tips or tricks, I would love to hear.
I do keep it short. Just enough to remind us that we need to talk about it. The actual discussion then doesn't get documented. So that's kind of how I handle that. But it's not meant to be a recording of what we did in our one-on-one. It's just like an agenda, bullet points, things that we should cover.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes so much sense. I think
Teresa?
we are kind of coming towards the end. We have Teresa, and then maybe after that, if there's room, we can take one more question, and then we'll wrap it up. Teresa.
Hey there, thanks, Amy. The question I have is, so I think it's important, like that you build like psychological safety and connection, like when you're talking to your team members. I'm just curious when you're coaching, like do you incorporate parts of that like in the coaching process, or is that kind of done separately because you have more personal conversations with a new team member about who they are, their role, excited about like the impact they're going to make, and then the coaching is kind of separate, or are there coaching questions that incorporate building psychological safety and connection with the team member?
I think of it very much as the latter, because even in the way I talked a little bit about how there are certain pieces of these questions that if you take them out, it removes the safety, right? It creates an opportunity for judgment, or sort of, and it removes the subjectivity of it. And I think that both like when I'm working as a coach and when I was working, as a part of a team, I'm actually not the type of person who likes small talk. Like, hey, how your kids, thought, whatever. I actually very much love jumping into conversation, and it's through the conversation, through how you're asking the questions, how you're showing care, how you're demonstrating like support, that the trust gets built over time. Um, Particularly in coaching, like a coaching relationship as well. Because you're only seeing that person, let's say, an hour every 2 weeks, there's a lot of context that you don't have about what's happening in their day-to-day lives and in their workplace. And the way that you build trust is really creating a safe, open space, but also within that space, I didn't get into some of the guiding questions in coaching, but also guiding in a way where it's not like I don't have an opinion. I probably have an opinion about like what it is that we may want to get to, but in a way that they are ready to go there. Like they are ready to consider a potential change of some sort. Because when you quote unquote force that change by like suggesting it or giving it as advice, some people receive it really well depending on the situation and your relationship with them, but others might just get defensive, or they might be like, no, like, I don't think that's a good idea for XYZ reason. And so um when you're giving advice and sort of suggesting, it can get tricky because the other person may get very defensive. And you, to your point, sometimes have to build a relationship outside of that so that when you give advice, like, that is listened to. Versus with coaching, the two happen together. There is no like, oh, let me be your friend and then that's why you listen to me, or let me be this and that's why you're gonna, hear what I have to say. You're gonna hear what I want to say because I've demonstrated that I care about you and that I'm on your side and I'm here to support you through the way that I'm asking these questions.
That's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, such an important distinction. Awesome. Any other last questions before we wrap up this fantastic session? Looks like we covered them all. Well, thank you, everybody. This was fantastic. Once more, please leave us some feedback, and we'll be sharing the recording on the channel. So thank you, Yuri, for this fantastic session, and everybody, see you at the next one. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Bye.